truly, I know I say this every time, but you giving presentations to you guys is probably my favorite. You're just so receptive. It's amazing. Not everybody is like that, just to let you know, like you are a prime bunch for sure. So anyway, like Elisa said, this is a really good topic for all ages. Like my husband and I, we're a two person like household. So we also have a small household, but it's good for older adults too, of when you have just one in your household or just you and a partner. So it's a really good topic. And this was actually one that was suggested as a topic when I kind of reached out I don't know, end of last year to see what was interesting for you guys. This was one of them. So I'm so glad it was. So let's go ahead and just get started. Elisa, are you good on the recording and everything? Yeah, okay, perfect. Let me okay. So you've seen this slide before, but for those that maybe are watching recording wise, that maybe aren't familiar with me. So I am Kara, I'm a registered dietitian and I own Kara Hair Nutrition. I provide online nutrition coaching for families and individuals. And I really have like a non-diet approach. So how can we make these lifestyle changes that are lasting and long-term? So that's what I do day to day. And we're going to go ahead and just get started on what we're actually covering today. So top things that we're going to cover is, yes, there are barriers and obstacles when it comes to cooking for a small household. And we're just going to cover what are those, just so we know what they are. Get that out there for us. And then how to plan those bonus meals. And I just want to give it, so this year I rephrased leftovers for, at least for my household, and I'm starting to use that everywhere. Instead of calling them leftovers, which kind of have like a negative connotation of just like, oh, I'm just having leftovers, I'm now calling them bonus meals, because doesn't that sound like more fun and exciting of like, oh, I get a bonus meal? So I'm going to use those interchangeably. So how to plan for bonus meals or your leftovers, but not too many, because you can only have so much of your soup or casserole in a week. Freezing tips. So we'll talk about how to freeze things in a smart way, how to shop smart and prevent food waste, because that's always kind of inevitable too with it's preventable, I guess, but it's also something that's very common when it comes to just having a small household. And then what to do when that motivation is lacking, which we can all be there, right? Where I don't want to cook. I don't want to cook for just one person or two people. And we're going to talk about giving you some ideas on that. So first off, what are those obstacles, those barriers that you have? Cooking for one or two, where it sounds maybe it's easier because you're not cooking for this big household, it also has its own set of challenges, as you probably all are familiar with and are kind of aware. So just some top hitters are, most recipes are for more than one or two people, right? So usually it's 4, 6, sometimes even 8, and it can make for a lot of leftovers. And food can get old, like figuratively and literally. So keeping that in mind of what do we do with all those? And then also leftovers can get boring or unappealing after a couple days. And when that happens, you may have all been there where it just starts getting pushed to the back of the fridge a little bit more. And then you kind of forget about it. And then all of a sudden, a week or two later, you are like, oh, I forgot about that, whatever, potato salad or whatever was in the back of the fridge. And so it's easy to get, forget about them and they go to waste when you're not excited about having them. And then good buys are usually found in bulk. So that's a struggle too, because you want to buy the bag of potatoes or you want to buy the bag of onions. It's helpful just to save some money, right? Because it's usually more cost effective. But just keep in mind that buying in bulk is helpful only if you're able to eat that large amount, whether it's a large container of spinach, it's the bread, whatever it is. So I'd love to hear from you guys. I have a couple more barriers, but on this kind of question, if there's any other biggest barriers that you have when it comes to cooking for a small household for you or you and your partner, feel free to, I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself if you want, or you can chat, or you don't have to respond at all either. That's totally fine.
Well, Kara, a big problem that I have, I like to cook once and eat twice. And, you know, it's a really great way to deal with stuff. But if you don't want to have, like my husband has this great recipe for chicken enchiladas. If we want to have the chicken enchiladas on Monday, we don't want to have them again on Tuesday or maybe Wednesday. So we think, okay, we can freeze them. But my stuff, I don't know if it's my containers or what, but it does not taste the same when you take it out of the freezer and reheat it. I recently retooled my kitchen to all glass containers, and they're supposed to be freezer to microwave, but the stuff in them gets hard and the liquid goes away and it looks dry. And so I have problems freezing stuff and then getting out again.
Okay. So freezing it, sometimes those the better options that we think of may not be so great after all, or not really working and not wanting the same thing every single day. So I have some ideas for you. And also some things that maybe the freezer won't be an option that you're like, no, that doesn't really work for me, but maybe there's some other things that will help so you're not bored of the same thing day in and day out. So that's a perfect one. If anybody else has any, oh, go ahead.
Occasionally I eat at restaurant, take out a restaurant, and it never tastes right when you take it out and reheat it the next day. Maybe you have some ideas on that, how to reheat restaurant food? Although I don't eat much. We ate twice in the last year at the restaurant and took it out.
I know, we haven't.
Home even when you get home from the restaurant and take it out, it doesn't taste the same.
I feel like you're right. Yeah, and it's true. Like we haven't really gone out to eat very much this past year. That will be something I'll keep that in mind as I talk throughout the presentation. If I don't quite touch on it, then at the end, we'll kind of give some ideas as well. And maybe some other people have ideas, but you're right. Sometimes the food doesn't taste quite the same. And so maybe there's ways to doctor it up or make it a little bit different.
Same day. When you get it home, it's cold. If it's a hot meal, it just doesn't taste right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So feel free to put in the, oh yeah, go ahead.
So Kara, I've got a problem with potatoes and onions. You know, if I don't want to just buy one onion at a time, if I buy a bag, before I get to the end, they're sprouting. Same way with the potatoes. So if you have any tips on how to keep potatoes and onions from sprouting, I'm all ears.
Okay, yes, I will touch on that. One thing is, I will mention about that, but also I found that maybe you're already trying this, but keeping it in a cool, dark spot. So sometimes even in like a cabinet, it might be close to like the oven, or it might be close to the dishwasher. I feel like our cabinets are also close to things that produce a lot of heat. And so that can cause more sprouting, but even just trying like, okay, if I keep that in the basement, which is easy to forget about it if it's in the basement, but that might also help prolong it a little bit, or, and I'll talk about some other ideas too, but keeping it in a dry and cool spot are ways to just help extend it a little bit, but we'll give you some of my other ideas too. Anybody else have?
What about refrigerating potatoes? I refrigerate them.
Yeah. Yep. You could, there's a lot of things that we can refrigerate that we don't actually think about refrigerating, for sure. Onions, I also refrigerate. And that also helps prevent you from like tearing up while you're cutting, because when you're cutting it, you're cutting through cells. And so then the gas, or like the molecules that have that, whatever it is, that the molecules that make you tear up, they're volatile. And so then you smell those and then you start to tear up. But if it's cold, you don't have as quite of it's a suppressed response. And so you don't actually tear up as much.
Can you cut them for a few days so that you'll have them ready for sauteing? And how long can an onion last in the refrigerator?
Great question. So if you do cut things in advance, so like onion or even garlic, the taste will diminish maybe a little bit. I honestly don't notice it, but I know scientifically that it's best like right away. Like people, like chefs would probably say like, oh, you should cut it and then use it immediately, because then you get the maximum flavor. I am not a chef, so I don't really notice it that much. So I will cut even some onion, and then I'll have it even for like, it's good for like I'd say 4 to 5 days in the refrigerator going on. I would personally probably go like a week, but I don't want to, I'd say 4 days, safety wise would be a good recommendation. And then in the fridge, if it's not already cut up, I mean, really as long as, I mean, I don't know for sure. I'd say like going on a month or two. You just want to be careful to make sure that it's not getting moldy when you pull it out, or getting like soft.
Well, an onion can last a month in the refrigerator, not cut up. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep. So I am going to continue, just so I make sure that I touch on everything. I love the ideas that you had, and I'll keep that in mind while I'm going throughout the presentation. Oh, you're on mute, I think, Emma.
How's that?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. Mine is, when you buy a rotisserie chicken, and can you freeze the rotisserie chicken, some of the meat? Can you freeze it, and how long can you freeze it for?
Great question. Yes, you can definitely freeze that. It's perfect to be frozen. And I would say 3 to 6 months, probably.
For rotisserie chicken?
In the
Really?
freezer.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And then I'll also give you some new ideas too for rotisserie chicken. I'll talk about that as well.
Okay.
So good
Sounds good.
questions, guys. I actually really liked hearing a little bit up front of what you're kind of thinking, and feel free to put in the chat too of if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to write them down, and that way we'll remember them for the end too. So just to kind of keep another barrier is that food going bad before you can get to it. And I think we can all relate to that. Anybody, I think that's a common thing that can happen. And these are just some like statistics that are really astounding to me. So 30% of food goes to waste in American households. So half of our produce is lost in the garbage on average, which is just crazy to think about, that half of that is going just to waste. Americans waste about a pound of food per person each day. And what's really interesting is that those of us that have the healthiest diet, so those that have a lot of fruits and vegetables in our diet, are the most wasteful, which makes sense because you're buying more of those fresh fruits and vegetables, which are more prone to go wasteful or go bad, rather than if you're getting a lot more processed foods, which last a lot longer. So just something to keep in mind of, a lot of times we have a lot of good intentions of, oh yeah, I'm going to start eating healthier, and I'm going to get all this, like, I'm going to start having salads every week or every day. And you get all this stuff and you're motivated for a day or two. And then you haven't actually gotten the habit of doing that, or the plan isn't there. It's just like the idea. And so we have to be realistic about what our consumption actually is and what we're actually going to be doing before we go all in. So making sure you have a plan, and I'll talk about that a little bit too. So just wanted to talk first about how to plan for those bonus meals, but not have too many. I feel like it's a fine line, right? Of like, you want to have some leftovers, but you don't want to have like multiple, like a whole fridge full of leftovers, right? So we're going to kind of walk through some ideas, and a lot of these may be pretty simple, to be honest, but I also think it's helpful to just, even if you get 1 or 2 tips out of today or things that you forgot about, it's great to just have those, be reminded of like, oh yeah, I forgot that I could do that. So some of these you might be like, yep, I got that, I know that, but other things might be new to you. So just keep that in mind. So how to plan for those bonus meals. You can cut a recipe in half, which you're like, yeah, I can do that. I think there's somebody that doesn't have they're not muted. So just let you know, it's not bothering me, but just want double check. So cut your recipe in half. So that's an easy way. A lot of times, like I said, it's for 4, 6, 8, and a lot of recipes are totally doable just to reduce down. Keep in mind though too, that bonus meals are a fun way to, I was gonna say, yeah, phrase leftovers. So I'll use that interchangeably, but keep in mind that many large servings are easily had, but also that making a meal and having leftovers is actually kind of nice too. So if it makes like 4 servings, it might be kind of nice just to make the full recipe and know that you will have those leftovers. And then oftentimes I hear people saying like, well, if I'm just making a meal for myself, that sounds unappealing. I don't want to just go to the work and make something for just me, but I always want to encourage you that you deserve it. You can, and the nice thing is that you can benefit from only cooking once or twice during the week, and then you can enjoy the fruits of your labor for multiple days. I know Barb was saying like, we don't want to have the same thing every day, but it's also kind of nice to just think of it that way of, I don't have to cook multiple times in a week, which is kind of nice. And just keep in mind that, like Elisa said, it's for your health and you'll feel better. And having that routine of like, even though I don't want to make something, I know it's for my good and I know I'll feel better by having a balanced meal. So I just wanted to let you guys keep that in mind too, of making sure that even though it's sometimes not appealing to just cook for yourself or for one or two people, you're used to cooking for a large group. In the long run, it's a lot more beneficial. But having the recipe is always a good option. And then kind of go with what Emma was saying is you can repurpose your bonus meals. So yeah, having that roasted or that rotisserie chicken one night tastes good, or having the restaurant meal one day tastes good. But then the second day or the third day of that same leftover, it's not great. And some recipes are better to do this than others. So like a casserole, it's not as easy to repurpose that. But so take, for instance, a rotisserie chicken. Easy to pick one up at the grocery store. And then the next day you could have that the first night. And then the next day you could have tacos or quesadillas or some kind of Mexican inspired. You can shred it up and add it into a quesadilla or a taco or burrito, enchiladas. And then the second night you could do pulled barbecue chicken sandwiches. So use the chicken in another way. And then you could also use, if you had some remaining chicken, you could use that for chicken salad, or adding it just into a salad. So a lot of different ways. If you don't want to freeze it all, you could also repurpose it throughout the week so that you kind of have one main meal and then you can repurpose it and have multiple leftovers in different ways, which I think is one of my favorite ways to do something. Like especially for like salmon or some kind of meat or protein, you can insert those in different ways throughout the week. Another thing is to plan out those bonus meals is to find a cookbook that's designed for 1 to 2 portions. There are so many out there. One Dish Kitchen is a great resource. So she has a website, she has a blog, so onedishkitchen.com, and she also has a cookbook. So if you're looking for just 1 to 2 serving meals, a lot of her recipes, they say 1 serving, but I'm pretty sure you could get 2 to 3 in there. They can be kind of large servings. So that's one resource. Eatingwell.com. If you go to their website and you just type in like the search bar for like recipes for 1 or 2, that's another great source of good quality recipes as well. And then if you want to be adventurous, you can just type into Google recipes for 1 or 2, and then a whole bunch of recipes will come up. Sometimes they're not as reliable, but the One Dish Kitchen and eatingwell.com are 2 good sources. And the nice thing about those is that they often cook more quickly because they're smaller quantities. And I have a PDF of, maybe 4 or 5 different recipes. So after this, I will email Elisa, get the emails for those that are listening right now, and then I'll send those to you just so you have them. There's some like main meals, and then I like desserts. So there's some desserts in there too, because oftentimes, I'm glad there's some, you guys like desserts as well. Oftentimes we like to just, the act of baking is fun, but we don't necessarily want a full like pan of cake or brownies or cookies. And so these are some recipes that are just really fun and good, but they only make for like 2 to 4 servings. So those are included as well in the PDF for you. And then the other thing that you can do is plan on freezing a portion if it's a big recipe. So that's where I said, like, you could still make that full recipe, but just plan on freezing. And like Barb said, like sometimes they freeze well, sometimes they don't. But it might work better to freeze a portion before you actually cook it. So for lasagna or casseroles, you could prepare them in bread pans rather than like a large 9x13 pan. And you cook just one. So you just cook the one bread pan, and then you freeze the others. you may have to use like have multiple bread pans or some disposable ones, but you freeze the others and you label and date them, because that's another thing that can be easy to get pushed back into the freezer and then you forget about them. But then once you pull it out, then you cook it, and then it's like a fresh meal all over again, rather than pulling it out, thawing it, and then just reheating it in the microwave. It's still a great option. But if you're finding that it doesn't taste quite the way you want it to, sometimes pulling it out when it's not, like when you haven't fully cooked it yet, and then cooking it makes it taste a little bit better. And then you could also then, on the other hand, cook the whole entire recipe. So maybe you do want to make all the lasagna. You just want to be done with it. So that's sometimes how I am. I'm like, I'm making it, I just want to cook it all. And then what you can do is freeze in individual containers and making sure it's sealed tightly. So you don't want to like open up the container and see a lot of ice crystals. You want to keep it really sealed tight. And then you can freeze in individual containers, like the Pyrex containers have like 2 cups or 4 cups. And then what you can do is pull those out as needed and then thaw that just for yourself for like lunch or dinner. So you don't have like any leftovers afterwards. And most recipes do freeze well if they're stored properly. So again, you want to make sure it's sealed really tightly. You could even, when you put it in the Pyrex, put some plastic wrap over it and then put the lid on top. And that might help just keep out that extra air. All right, so, and yeah, feel free if there's questions, keep writing them in and I'll definitely get to those. So freezing tips. So yes, you can freeze things. These are some ways that you can freeze. A lot of different options. There's more than you realize that you can freeze. And I want to make sure that freezing becomes your friend, because it's just a really valuable asset when you are just cooking for 1 or 2. So a lot of things, like I said, are probably things that you don't even think about that you can freeze. So even milk and yogurt, a gallon is cheaper, right? So say you want to I want to get that gallon, but you don't know if you can finish it all in the week or the few days or whatever. So if you know that you're going to use milk, say for a recipe, or maybe a recipe calls for milk, but you don't typically drink milk, and so you're getting even just a pint of milk and you're like, well, I'm not really going to be using this, or I'm not going to be using all of this cream or half and half or whatever. You can actually freeze that in ice cube trays, and it makes a great way to, you freeze them, and then once the milk or whatever is frozen, then you take it out of the ice cube tray and you put it into a freezer bag. And great size for using for recipes that call for like 1/4 of a cup of milk or 1/2 a cup of milk, or in smoothies. Just a little tip. So 1 ice cube tray is 1 ounce or 2 tablespoons. So if a recipe calls for 1/4 of a cup, then you would use like 2 ice cubes of milk. So that's another way to just, if you are thinking like, I don't want to let this go to waste, or you want to make sure you get a good deal, that's a way to do it. Another thing that you can freeze are avocados. So you can also freeze those in ice cube trays. You would mash it up and put those in the ice cube tray, and those are great for smoothies. Or you could use it probably even like instead of oil in like muffins. I just did this weekend. You can use avocado instead of the oil. Kind of make sure that it doesn't exactly work for all recipes. This recipe that I particularly used did call for avocado in the recipe, but that's another way that you could use that repurposed avocado. And another thing, so just like you can put potato or onion in the fridge, you can also put avocados in the fridge. Some people don't really realize that, because there's this like meme where you have an avocado that's not ripe, ripe for like 10 minutes, and then it's like overripe, right? So there's a really small window where it's ripe. And after that, you're like, well, shoot, now I can't use them. But what I do is, even when it's just getting to the point where it's ripe, maybe even a little still firm, I'll put that in the fridge because I know it will continue to ripen. So the cold will just slow down the ripening process, but it will continue to ripen when it's in the fridge. So that's one way to help preserve it. And I'll keep the avocados in there for 3 weeks or so. By that time, it's getting a little squishy and not as nice, but it's still still totally eatable and still taste delicious. So that's something that you can do, is put that in the fridge. And then whenever you cut up like when you open the avocado, that's when a lot of times people are like, well, I have to use it right away, or it starts to go bad. And the main thing is just like apples that will start to brown when they're with oxygen, when they're exposed to oxygen, that's what happens to avocados. So that browning on the top is totally safe for us. It just doesn't look very nice. So what you want to do is try to protect it from any oxygen exposure. And so you can wrap it, keep the pit in the avocado, that also helps. And then you can wrap it with saran wrap and put it in a Ziploc bag. And that just helps keep the oxygen off of the avocado. And say you open it up and you're like, well, there's still browning on top. And if that really bothers you, you can just skim off that top layer, and underneath that is totally fine. So those are just some ways, like, you don't have to totally think like, well, I just ruined that avocado, I need to throw the whole thing out. It's still good to go. So I got some questions. So one was the strawberries and the blueberries I'm getting to on how to keep those and make those last. One was, if you're freezing milk or yogurt to make yogurt, how do you thaw each of them? So if you're freezing like the milk, you would probably just, and you're using it in a recipe, I would just say you put the ice cubes in a bowl and then let it thaw in the fridge. So you would have to like know in advance, or you could, even if you want it quickly, you could put it in a bag, the amount that you wanted, and just put it over hot water so that it melts a little bit more quickly. So those are some ways that you can do it. But if you're doing it in a smoothie, that's kind of the nice thing, is then you don't have to worry about thawing it. And then Claire had a question of, when do you put mangoes in the fridge? That's funny because I have a whole like bowl of mangoes on the counter right now. And I keep testing. I'm like, okay, is it ready for the fridge yet? And I would say once they're kind of feeling ripe. So if you know when a ripe mango is, it's soft, like it's a little more, you can press into it a little bit more and it gives a little bit. That's when I put them in the fridge to keep them fresh for a few weeks then, I would say. So that's when I do that. All right, you're probably getting tired of freezer tips by now. So real quick, spinach and greens, those are another one that you can freeze really easily. And those are ones that, those go bad quick in the fridge, even if you're careful. So I do know like the clamshell ones of spinach, those last longer than if you get a bagged spinach. So something to keep in mind with that. And you can freeze the spinach and just use that then in soups or quiches or anything that you can think of. Like really, when you're cooking something, you can throw in that frozen spinach and it cooks down and you really don't even know that it's there. So that's a good way to use it up and also give you some nutritional benefit. You can also puree, if you want to do like a little bit of extra work, you can puree the spinach or the greens with water and then add those to ice cube trays. And then those are perfect in like smoothies, sauces, stews, adding it to quinoa or rice, just to give it some like a little bit of nutritional boost. So kind of ways to get creative with that. Really easy way to do that and not a lot of extra work. But one thing to keep in mind, like I said, spinach doesn't last very long. And so if you're planning ahead, using that more delicate produce first when you get it from the grocery store, and then saving those hardier produce for later in the week. So saving like the potatoes for later, or saving like any kind of like root vegetable, carrots or that kind of thing. Those are hardier. Those are going to keep a little bit longer, but the fresh stuff will, like the berries or the spinach, those are more delicate. So using those up first. So here's your question, Claire, on berries. So spreading, what you do is, well, there's one other, I'm going to get to another way to help make them last, but if they are kind of going bad, you know, they go so quickly, freezing them is a great option just to preserve them a little bit longer. So spreading it out on a plate or a sheet pan that's lined with wax paper, and then freezing those once they're frozen, then you can put them in a bag. Same with herbs are another great thing, especially in the summer. If you have an herb garden or have some herbs, you can freeze those in ice cube trays with olive oil. Seriously, it's the best thing ever. So it's like a flavor bomb. And when you're sauteing vegetables, instead of using just olive oil, you can pull out one of those ice cubes and it has some fresh herbs in there. And that just adds a ton of flavor to what you're cooking. So that's another great way, just easy way to use some herbs that you have on hand, but maybe you can't eat it all at once. And then one more thing, sorry, I'll keep, the freezer is just so great at preserving things if you want to go a little bit of extra work up front. So bananas, they're great for banana bread. I feel like growing up, whenever bananas started going bad, my mom always made banana bread. I feel like we always had banana bread in the freezer, but you can only have so much banana bread, and oftentimes it's pretty sweet. So what you could do is slice and freeze those banana slices individually and then transfer them in a bag. And I just eat them plain, but you could add them to smoothies. You could add them to yogurt, or you could make this really fun little creation. You could put peanut butter and like a jam and sandwich that between two bananas, and then you freeze it that way. And that's like a really fun, easy like snack idea that you could have, or with your grandkids or something. They would love that. And then, so one said, as quick, I'm looking at the chat, how do you do a quick defrost of fish? Perfect question. So if it's sealed in like individual fillets, you can just run that under hot water, and then it defrosts really, really fast because it is such a tender, like small piece of fish. So that's how you could do a quick defrost of fish. You could also do it in the microwave, but I feel like you're more at risk to actually cooking the fish because it's such a tender cut of protein. And then Therese said, I frozen chopped celery on a tray, then put it in bag. Works fine to add casseroles. Yes, yep, I'm gonna get to that too. So in like celery, carrots, onion, all of those are really good. You can chop those up, and that's kind of like your mirepoix, I think is what it's called in French, your basic, well, a lot of French recipes are started with that. So you can just add that to the freezer, and those are perfect. Another question that I had was directed to me is, can you freeze bananas in their skins? Totally, yes. I do that all the time. So if you are making banana bread and you know that you're going to use a recipe like, or muffins, or I have a banana oat bar kind of thing recipe, I will, and I know I'm going to use the whole banana in that recipe, I just freeze it all. And then I just have to know like a day or 12 hours in advance that I'm going to be making that. And then I put it in a bowl, and then I put that in the fridge, because if you just put the banana in the fridge, it's going to get juice all over. But if you put it in a bowl, then it collects it. And then I put the juice and everything when I'm making the recipe into when I'm cooking, like making it, I'll just put everything from that bowl into the recipe. So great question. Yes, you can definitely do that. Another quick question was how to separate a bag of chicken. What bag do you use? Yep. So if you get a fresh thing of chicken, maybe you got in bulk, or maybe you just have a pound of chicken and you don't want a pound or a 2-pound chicken, then I would recommend you can separate it out. You don't want to freeze it and then pull it out and then freeze it again. You only want to freeze that meat once when it's raw. If it's cooked, and then you can freeze it again, but there's too much fluctuations in temperatures going on if you take it from the freezer, portion it out, and then freeze it again. So you would just take out what you want. And then I would say that you could, if you have a sealer, like an airtight sealer, that would be fantastic, but a lot of people don't. So you could also wrap it in like saran wrap and then in aluminum foil after that if you wanted to, or you could just do it really tightly, airtight in a freezer bag. And you could also do that as well. So I would say those would be my best tips. If somebody else has something else that you think that works really well for you, feel free to write that in the comments as well. So I want to make sure that we have enough time to get through everything. So I'm going to quick. So sweets are another thing that you can easily freeze. Bread is another thing that you can freeze as well. And then nuts and ground seeds. So if that's something that's really easy to buy in bulk, but if you don't eat them very often, because they have a lot of fats that can go rancid, the fats aren't very stable. You want to freeze those and store them in the freezer if you don't go through your, say it's flaxseed or ground flaxseed or nuts like walnuts, just keeping those in the freezer would be the best thing to do. Another thing that you can do is roasting your vegetables once. So that's a great thing if you're kind of like, okay, these vegetables are kind of going bad. Roasting it actually is a great way to preserve them. And they're a lot more lenient, I guess, than eating them just raw. So you can roast them right when they're kind of getting on the verge of going bad, or just roast them because you like to eat roasted vegetables. And then you can use them for the week, or you could freeze them for later. And I will say here, this is where the texture will change. But if you're adding it into something, so say you're adding it into a salad or kind of just you don't mind, it can still be a great side dish. But that way you're like, especially for like roasted sweet potatoes, roasted root vegetables like beets or carrots, even like broccoli works pretty well, to be honest, not as well, but those roasted root vegetables work really well frozen. They're not going to be crisp, but they're going to still have that flavor. And then another thing you can do is cook a batch of grains at once. So quinoa, farro, barley, rice, you can freeze those in individual containers. And the same thing as the other leftovers, take out a little bit, take out one little container that you want, and then use that for your side or your salad. And then this is one thing I want all of you to like try if you haven't, is to pull together a grain bowl. So now you have all these components, and this is like a fantastic, like easy dinner, easy lunch. And you could have it for like the week. You could just pull out enough for one meal. And I'll ask maybe, I don't know if a show of hands, I can't see everybody, but if you've had grain bowls before, maybe show a show of hands if you have. So I see maybe one, from what I can tell, like maybe one or two. So I would encourage everybody to give this a try. So all it is, especially when you're kind of like, I don't know what to make, you're kind of can like just not feeling motivated. So what all it is like a grain, obviously it's a grain bowl, and it's maybe usually like a half a cup of prepared grain. So you could use from the freezer, like we mentioned, or you could just cook it fresh and then freeze the rest. And then 3/4 cup or 4 ounces of protein. So again, that rotisserie chicken is coming in. You could do like a fillet, you could of salmon or tuna or whatever. And then you could also do like frozen edamame. That's really easy. Beans, those are super easy things to add in. And then you add in those vegetables, and then just any kind of vinaigrette or sauce. You could make your own, or you could buy some. There's lots of different options out there. So Italian or an Asian style. And it totally changes up the type of meal. And there's a lot of ideas online too, but don't make it complicated. Like this is so easy. And a lot of these things can come straight from the freezer, or you could put in the freezer afterwards. Okay, I see Claire's question on the restaurant food. So I'm gonna wait till the end to focus on that, just to make sure I have enough time to get through. But I would say it is hard for, well, let me just answer now. So restaurant food like pasta, I would always add in, if you're reheating pasta of any kind, adding a little bit of milk or cream to it, because otherwise it's just gonna be dry and not very, like you said, it doesn't taste very good. But if you add a little moisture to it, that will help kind of loosen everything up again and make it kind of resemble a little bit more like what you had at the restaurant. For fish, honestly, it's really hard to reheat any kind of protein and make it taste as good, because the microwave is just going to continue to dry it out more, because you're cooking it another time. And so then it dries it a little bit extra each time. So you could add a little, like you could even put it in the oven and cook it a little bit slower. So at 350, 375, and you could put it in a pan and put a little bit of water in with it, so it steams it a little bit. That's a little bit extra work, in my opinion, for just reheating something from a restaurant. But it's going to be challenging. And what you could do is then, instead of reheating the fish, because it's already been heated once, you could add it cold into like a salad, is another great way to have it, just repurposing it and adding it into something else, rather than trying to have it the way it was intended at the beginning, like when you first got it for the restaurant. So then you're not comparing it to what it was. Okay. Another thing with the freezer, a lot of times when it's a recipe for just 1 to 2, the annoying part is is that you have a lot of like random odd ingredients left over. So you might have like half a can of beans, which I find is like, that's why I'm like, I'd rather just have the full like 4 serving, or like just use up the whole can of beans and then have the leftovers or put that in the freezer. But there's a lot of things here that you can freeze. I'm not going to go into all of it, but like Therese was saying, you can chop up the remaining onions or peppers that you had left over from a recipe, and you can freeze those in freezer bags. They're perfect for adding into like omelets, eggs, any kind of casserole or soup. It's like amazing how many times you can use that stuff. You can even buy them in the freezer section pre-chopped. So that would cut out even the need to have to prepare an onion or prepare something and then freeze it. It's just already frozen for you and chopped for you too, which is nice. And don't worry, I saw Emma was taking a picture. I can also, if you want, send me the recipe too. No, you're fine. Or not send you the recipe. I can send you the PDF of the PowerPoint as well. Just let me know. Yeah, remind me. I am going to skim along here. So freezing bulk items, that's another way to, if you want to buy in bulk, because it is so convenient. Like meats, cheeses, sauces, deli meats, those are all things that you can heat, that you can freeze and then take out of the freezer, or you can get from the deli counter the exact amount that you want. It's going to be more expensive, but it's also the convenience of, and not wasting what you, anything at the end either, because you can get the 1/4 of a pound that you want rather than the full pound. All right, so how to shop smart and prevent food waste. So we're just going to kind of go through here. So planning your meals out is so key. So often it's easy to just be like, oh, I see these Brussels sprouts, those look good, I'm going to pick those up. But then whenever I see something like that, I always ask myself, okay, when am I going to make this? And how am I going to make it? Like, what recipe am I going to make it in, or with what am I going to make it with? So that way I already have a plan when I pick it up of like, okay, I'm going to make this. I think I can make it on Wednesday, or I'm going to make it this weekend with this meal. So then it's not going to, like, if I just pick it up because it looks good, it's easy for it to go to waste. Another thing that you can do is connect your meals together. And what I mean by that is planning your meals based on a set of ingredients. So that darn celery comes up again, because so often a recipe calls for like half an onion or 1 celery stalk. And so what you can do is then think ahead of like, what other recipes do I have that I can use some other celery with, or knowing that you can cut it up and freeze it as well. But sometimes it's nice, like that half a can of beans, what else can I use a can of beans with, rather than just having it in the fridge and not using it. I said making multiple bonus meals, so changing it up, I already kind of touched on that a little bit. And then shopping smart by knowing your labels. And what I mean by labels is the date labels. So date labels aren't regulated by the FDA or anything like that. They're just suggestions for most foods. And date labels are like use by, best by, those kind of things. And they don't mean that you have to throw out the food once it reaches that printed date. Only actually infant formula is regulated and must be thrown out once it reaches that date on the label. But otherwise, all of the labels are completely voluntary. And most producers are conservative with their dating because, one, they want to make sure that you get the best quality. They want you to taste it and be like, wow, this tastes really good, rather than having something you're like, this does not taste good, I'm never buying this again. And two, they want you to buy it again. So they're going to be like, okay, I'm going to be a little bit conservative. So that way you see the label and you think, oh, I should throw this out and then buy a new one. So I won't go through this too much, but best by date, it just guarantees the period of time that the product will be at its best flavor and quality. The sell by date is just informing the seller to remove that item from the shelf. Because again, the producer wants to make sure that we're receiving the item at its optimal quality. And then use by date is the last day that the producers guarantee the best quality. So if you notice there, everything is based on quality. It's not by safety. And so I think the best way to tell is just like the sniff test, how it looks, like using your own senses to really see, like, is this something that's still safe for me? And then shop smart by shopping in bulk when you can. So some foods you may not be able to buy in bulk. And that's just kind of, it doesn't work for you. Like, okay, just know that it's only beneficial to you if you're actually going to use everything that you buy in bulk. Otherwise, it's actually not a cost saving at all because you're throwing it away anyway. But some of them still make sense and can be cost effective. So like Therese said, like onions and potatoes can still be, if you're storing them in a dry and a cool place, they actually can work really well. Apples, oranges, even avocados, by storing them in the fridge, can last for quite a while. And then think of like pantry items that you use on a regular basis. Those would be other things that you could benefit from buying in bulk. But the other ones that are like berries, for instance, like probably not beneficial unless you plan on freezing them. But you might not be able to get through them, and just know like, it's more cost effective for me just to be able to buy a smaller amount and use that rather than having the others go to waste. Or knowing like when you buy the onions or the potatoes, having some recipes in line of like, how can I use these, or planning on just freezing them too, like cutting up the onions and freezing those for later. Okay, so this goes back to how do you save? So for Claire's question about how do you keep strawberries and blueberries last? So if you don't get anything else, so the grain bowls, give those a try because they're fantastic for simple meals. And then purchasing the Debbie Myers green bags. It looks like a hoax. It looks like an as seen on TV thing, but I have these and they work so well at extending the life of your produce. What it shows here is actually true. And you can reuse the bag. So they're plastic, but I wash them out and I reuse them. And it just helps prevent the ethylene gas that the produce releases. It kind of like takes that, and so that you're not, it keeps them fresher longer. And then one other question came in, do you freeze flowers before or after opening or keep them room temperature? So flour as in like baking flour, I would I guess I freeze like whole wheat flour because there is more, if I'm not using it right away, because there is more fat in the whole wheat flour just because the germ is included with the whole wheat. But I'll open it, I'll put it in the freezer after I open it, or usually before I open it, I don't bother with putting it in the freezer. But if you use it right away, then you can keep it at room temp. I think I kind of touched on these, so I'm gonna let that go. Another thing is just keeping in mind that you can buy individually packaged frozen fish and chicken fillets, which is nice. So if you don't want to like get the whole amount of chicken and then portion it out and then freeze it yourself, you can buy them already packaged. Again, it's more plastic, it's more packaging, and it might cost a little bit more, but there's something to be said about the convenience of it and only having to take out that one amount that you want, and knowing that it's frozen well, like it's secure, there's no oxygen that's getting to it or air. And then looking for sales for items that you normally buy. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And then buying hard cheeses, those actually last longer than soft cheeses. So if you're open to different types of cheeses, like your fresh mozzarella or your soft cheeses, those go bad and moldy pretty quickly, but you could get harder cheeses like Parmesan or Gruyere or different types of those harder cheeses. Those last even for 6 to 12 months. You just want to wrap them in wax or parchment paper, take them out of the plastic wrap that they're in, because that's actually keeping the moisture close to the cheese rather than like the wax or the parchment paper will let it breathe a little bit more. So how to shop smart economically. Shopping in season, of course, farmers markets, sharing a CSA membership with a friend are all good options. And then you can also, don't think that you can't get canned or frozen already. Those are great options. They're just as nutritious as fresh, sometimes even more nutritious because they're packaged right from the source. They're picked at their prime time, like ripeness, and then they're frozen right away or they're canned. So you can add those to smoothies, soups, stir fries, pasta dishes. All those things are great ways to use those frozen vegetables or fruit. Another thing, so my mother-in-law, it was interesting. She didn't, this is another, I want to make note in case other people think of this, that if you want to have produce that's like in the bags at the grocery store, you don't have to buy that whole bag, like the Brussels sprouts, or I'm trying to think of other things that they might put, the grapes that they put in a bag. You can take the amount that you want, that you're going to use, because it's sold by the pound. So you don't have to actually take everything that's included in that bag, or you can mix and match what you want for like the amount that you want, because it's all sold by the pound. So you don't have to feel like you have to buy the whole bag. Take the amount that you need and that you want. Same with like bananas, something like that. And then the lingering produce that's around, try to be creative, use it up. So those grain bowls are a great way to do it. Roasting those vegetables definitely helps kind of extend it a little bit more. Quiches or frittatas, soups. So even if you have a canned soup, add in some more vegetables into that soup, because that's a great way to boost it up. Scrambled eggs, like this picture here, looks like phenomenal. I would definitely go for that. And that's just adding some vegetables into your scrambled eggs. So if you have those extra things lying around, add them in. If you have the onions, if you have some potatoes, add those in. All right, so real briefly, we're gonna skim through this because I wanna leave a little bit of time for if anybody has any last questions, but I feel like I've been kind of catching up on people that have questions right now. So what to do when that motivation is lacking, which happens to all of us, myself included. So here are some ideas. So a lot of times we can feel like we're resorting to cheese or crackers, takeout, packaged meals, just because it's like, I don't want to cook anything. But that can lead to that unhealthy lifestyle over time if we do it on a regular basis. So think of like a balance is that key. So we don't need as many calories as we get older, but just keep in mind that we do need the same amount of nutrients, if not more. And so we want to get the most bang for your bite as much as possible. And one thing you can do when you're kind of planning out your day, your meals, is just keeping that My Plate in mind as a guide. So including at least 3 food groups into your meal. And that can be like the cheese and crackers, but then adding some vegetables and fruits on the side. So then you're balancing out that meal. And you want to look at maybe the entire day. Don't get stressed out if the individual meal doesn't look quote unquote perfect. We want to make sure that your whole day is looking more balanced. So what haven't you had enough of yet today? So maybe you haven't had any fruit or vegetables today and it's lunch or dinner time. Think about, okay, how can I add those in? So some ways to do that, what to have on hand when you don't want to cook. The tuna packets or salmon packets, cans of tuna, and it had Triscuits with it. And then add those vegetables and fruits, just kind of round out that meal. Rotisserie chicken, again, is perfect. These Bird's Eye protein blends, they're in the frozen section. They are so great because they have a grain in them, they have a protein in them, they have the vegetables in there, and they have lots of different types of flavors. So those would be some good things just to have in the freezer when you're like, I don't really want to make anything, but that's an easy thing to have that's nutritious and balanced, that's going to give you that bang for your bite. Frozen meals, so those can also be a great option. Just be careful of which ones you choose. So look for ones that have 500 to 600 milligrams of sodium, no more than 15% of your daily value of saturated fat, maybe 20%. And that's what's over on that column there in the blue, looking there in the percent daily value. Other quick ideas. So popcorn, fruits and vegetables, round out that meal. Scrambled eggs with veggies and toast, perfect breakfast for dinner. I do it all the time. It's amazing. And now that you have all those extra veggies on hand, you can add those into the scrambled eggs. Use like individual microwavable packets of quinoa or rice, and then like a pre-cut veggie tray just as options for sides. I know it's going to cost more, so that's not what you'd be buying in bulk, but sometimes that convenience and health is greater than like the cost sometimes. So you just have to balance out what's in your budget and what do you have time for. Canned soup can definitely be a great option as well. Just again, make sure that you look for ones that are less than 600 milligrams of sodium, check the protein, and then also watch that portion size, because if you usually have a whole can of that soup, well, then you need to usually double the amount of what's in that serving, because the serving is only for a cup, but you want to look at the entire can then and keeping that in mind. So you could always add in some extra veggies. If you have some beans, like canned beans, add that into it too. So it can kind of bulk up that protein, bulk up the soup a little bit more. And if you have anything, what do you do when you don't feel like making anything? So if you have any other ideas, feel free to write them in as well. So I was rushing through the end, so sorry about that, but I wanted to make sure that we had finished on time and maybe had enough time for like some questions if needed. But really today I want you to just get out of that, like maybe 1 or 2 new ideas that you could try, maybe some motivation there of like, oh, these are some things I could do so I'm not feeling like I'm stuck in a rut anymore. Kind of ask yourself what works well for you. Mini bonus meals, or maybe multiple small meals that you just make small amounts and then freeze or do as needed. Meal plan is always a great idea. Make the most out of those ingredients. Remember to utilize that freezer. Shop in bulk only when it makes sense. And then keep those time savers on hand. So that is it. Free to answer some questions. I can stick around a little bit longer if needed. And then one quick thing, because I love you guys so much, I wanted to share with you one quick thing on a more personal side. So my husband and I are pregnant, so we just wanted to share that news with you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you so much. We are due at the end of September.
Awesome.
Yeah, so
Yay.
thank you. I was excited to share with you guys. I don't often do that in groups, but you guys are special to me. So I wanted to make the news to you guys as well. So it's been a long journey. As that says, we actually went through IVF to have our baby, and it's just definitely a blessing. So just wanted to.
And you're going to be cooking for more then.
That's right. Yes. No
We'll
more.
send the leftovers to you.
There you go.
She's gonna
I will
make
take
all
them.
her own baby food. You watch. She's gonna have those
Yeah.
Well-
ice things of frozen baby food.
We'll see what happens. Who knows?
You
But
have a
my
glow in your
congratulations.
face.
Thank you so much. You guys are so kind. So I'm going to quick unshare just so you can see everything, I guess. And I know we're just like a minute or 2 over. So if there was any questions, anything that other lingering things, let me
I have
know.
a question, Kara.
Yes.
You know me, the uncooked. Are those Debbie Meyer green bags? Are those readily like at Walmart, Amazon?
Great question.
Are they easy to buy?
So yes, I got them on Amazon, and I have not seen them in, I guess I haven't looked, to be honest, like at Walmart or anything, but I did order them on Amazon. And they're like $9 or something like that. They're not expensive, especially when you know that you can reuse them. They're definitely worth like reducing the waste of your produce.
What do you put in them? Do you put in like potatoes? You don't put strawberries and blueberries.
I've done, so most of the time I personally have used it for like things that I get in our CSA, like in the summer. So greens or any kind of produce, like asparagus, Brussels sprouts, kind of broccoli. And then I've definitely done strawberries as well. Like once they start to not look so good, I'll kind of like, oh, I should put them in a bag so that they stay fresh a little bit longer. And one thing, you want to keep the moisture out of the bag. So sometimes I'll like kind of put a paper towel in there and take out the moisture.
Do spinach too? I guess you can put in there anyway.
Yep, you can put any fresh produce in there and it does a great job.
Do you refrigerate the bag then and the contents?
Yes, yep,
Okay.
great question. Yep, so I freeze those.
And I have another question. I kind of get the general idea from seeing other people freeze stuff. Nobody has ever told me this, that the important thing is to get any extra air out of the bag. Is that true? You should like roll up the bags really tight. And remember Tupperware, you used to have to burp it to get the air out. Should you try to get all the air out of stuff before you freeze it?
Yeah, I would definitely do that. So if you can, yeah, any kind of bag that you're using, getting it airtight, because otherwise that will lead to more chances of freezer burn too. And that might be a reason why some of your casseroles or whatever you're freezing, even with the Pyrex, sometimes that lid isn't as secure as we'd like it.
So,
So you-
put, not foil, put saran wrap over it maybe and
Yeah, so
and
put
the
that,
lid on?
yep, definitely. That'd be
Okay.
something to try.
Okay.
Yep. And I also, if you like, sometimes those freezer bags are really good for just general storing. I also like the silicone bags, like the reusable bags now, like Stasher is a brand, but there's so many different brands out there. Those reusable silicone bags do a good job of just preserving what's inside a little bit better. It protects it from that freezer burn pretty well, I'd say.
Okay.
Yeah. Great questions today, guys. I feel like this was, hopefully I adequately answered them and gave you some new ideas to think about.
Thank you very much, Kara.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Tara.
Thank you.
Very
Very
important.
helpful.
Great. And so I'll be back again in June. I'm sure keep an eye out on the newsletter and everything on what I'll be presenting on and what that looks like and signing up for it. So, and hopefully by then it'll be nice weather, right? So we're gonna bank on that.
Do you know any good
Great.
sites for like recipes for sauces that you can put in like chicken or fish or something like that?
Yeah. So it kind of depends on like just real quick off the top of my head. So one thing for like fish, like if you want like, I really like doing soy sauce and some ginger is kind of a nice Asian kind of inspired. You can do some lime juice with that. You can do that for chicken as well. Other sauces, you could do like a balsamic vinegar. Probably not for the fish so much, but for the chicken would be a really good one. You could do flavored balsamic vinegar. There's so many different, like if you go to a specialty store, they have all those flavors.